Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Accelerate webinar series hosted by the University of Denver's Daniels College of Business Executive Education Program. I'm David Worley, Executive Director, and I'll be your host today. The Accelerate webinar series is designed to help you accelerate your capacity to deliver results for your organization. Today's webinar will be roughly 25 minutes. We will start with a brief presentation from our faculty, and today we will be doing kind of an ongoing question and answer format. As always, we will attempt to answer as many questions live as we can, and if we don't get to yours, we will record the answers and add them to our follow-up email. At the bottom of the screen, you will find a question and answer icon. Feel free to submit a question whenever you see fit. For this 10th installment of our series, we are happy to welcome Alvin McBurrow. For over 7 years, Alvin has been a clinical professor at the Daniels College of Business. He primarily teaches a course on community capital in our Denver MBA program and another popular entrepreneurial class called Gateway to Business. Alvin is currently the founder and principal of OGX Consulting, a firm dedicated to helping organizations achieve greater operational performance. Alvin has a rich professional history, having served in critical roles at a variety of organizations, including Cisco Systems, Level 3 Communications, AT&T, and the Republic of Liberia. The most important element of Alvin for today's discussion is that he is a forward-looking strategic thinker, and he has a unique gift for conveying that vision and strategy. Amongst several conversations with Alvin, I have been repeatedly impressed with the practicality that he shows mixed with vision for the immediate future. And for this reason, we have asked him to engage our Accelerate webinar audience around the topic of the new decentralized workforce. We think this topic is incredibly timely. And so with that, Alvin, thanks so much for being with us.
Thank you, David. Looking forward to this. Thank you.
Yeah, to just jump right into the topic, Alvin, will you start by talking about what organizations can do to build a cohesive culture in this time of decentralization?
All right, thank you, David. And let me first start by saying that, over the past 10 weeks, we've heavily been involved with participating in a lot of roundtables, a lot of discussions, a lot of conference calls with executives from across the world. And some of the key things that we're looking at today, the things that we've seen as significant shifts, has been companies or organizations moving more towards what you exactly refer to as this decentralized workforce model. And from our perspective, we believe that this will be around for some time to come. And here are the reasons why. There are three major reasons that we look at. The first one is around the fact that there is a whole concept that is called virus economics that was coined by Austin Goolsbee out of the University of Chicago. Primarily, if we can control the virus, then we can start talking about economic outputs and we can start recongregating and doing a whole lot more together. But as you can tell right now, we're still struggling with regards to how we're trying to control that. So often it is referred to as good health policies equal good economic outcomes. So that's one of the key things that we've seen in that space. The second piece that we've also seen around there is a phrase, again, that is also coined by some group, is a phrase that is called VUCA. It stands for volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity. Those are all elements, again, that is primarily driving where we are today as a result of the virus. When you combine those two together, from a human perspective, there is something else, again, that we look at is fear. And as we know, fear is the major motivating factor. A lot of us are afraid of the fact that when we get out there, when we try to congregate and re-establish ourselves in a social setting, the fear of us contacting this particular virus is something that is driving that as well. As a result, a lot of executives are now beginning to, they've gone into the mode where in order for them to effectively mitigate this and protect the most valuable asset is primarily having them work remotely, or as you rightly call it, work decentralized in this whole new manner as we move forward. So some of the things that we've seen organizations do from a best practice standpoint has been around the fact that they're now beginning to establish what is referred to as agile structures, right? So they still have the organizations, but they're breaking them up into different cohesive units to get certain component of the work completed. Another piece, again, that we've seen, leaders are beginning to start thinking about the way that they can lead from afar. And there are certain best practices that they're beginning to insert as to how they're able to drive that particular piece of how they're leading from afar, making sure that they have constant communication. You're constantly there to be able to understand the needs of the people that work for them.
Mhm.
Another piece, again, that we've seen as part of the best practice is around installing this whole caring culture. Because now, at one point in time, I did not really have myself concerned with what other people were doing within the organization. I was here to produce my work. But now, usually one of the key things now, there is empathy that is being brought into this whole space. For most of us who had kids that were in school over the past few weeks, recently we're on summer break now, but it was a common practice to have, children in the background crying, or children playing in the background, or running across your webinar or your screen when you're on a conference call. So that was one of the common practice that we saw, or dogs barking in the background. So empathy has become critical for how we want to be able to move forward around this. The other one, again, is around installing a whole new routine or collaboration routine within organizations. Given the fact that most of us cannot really congregate together or get together as a group, most companies now, or organizations, or people that are leading these groups, are now looking at how they can easily have coffee breaks together. So coming together on a Zoom call, 5 or 6 people, let's have a coffee break and sit down and talk about what's going on. Trying to find ways to be able to celebrate the significance in other people's life, birthdays, parties, celebration, people going for happy hours, having margarita Fridays. Those are all elements that we're seeing. And leveraging technology is another big one, again, that we've seen companies that have instituted this as to how they're adopting and how they're leveraging that as well. And the last one that we'll talk about will be around security, right? The seriousness of security. So when you talk to most IT professionals, which happens to be a large constituent of the clients that we support as well, security has always come up as one of the prominent things. With people working from home, they're exposed to major vulnerabilities that you can hack into the network, because now they could easily be exposed if you're working from a public network where that is not 100% secure. So those are all elements that are beginning to come up, and companies are now taking new approaches as to how they're addressing that as well.
Those are really interesting points, Alvin. And there's a ton of really great insight into that. So just to repeat for the audience, you said the best practices are creating agile structures, learning to lead from afar, being able to 3, install a caring culture that accounts for the empathy necessary in the situation. 4, how to make routine collaboration, and then 5, security. So on those 5 points, what would you say to leaders who are trying to be agile and their organizations have become more agile in this COVID period, but they're feeling a little bit like they're losing cohesion? So how does a leader maintain both agility and cohesion of their group in really tangible ways?
So great question, David. And one of the key things that we will say is that there are ways that you can easily institute that. One of the key things that we've seen other leaders do, and I think I will share this instance with a company that we just had a discussion with, and we're pretty much doing some workshop for them. It is primarily around the way they've approached it, to realize that, okay, from our perspective, we need to be able to lead. I mean, we still need to be able to maintain culture, but how can we effectively drive for 2 things, right? We want to have collaboration. At the same time, we want to make sure that we're also delivering the outputs that we've promised to be able to be viable as means of how we deliver great value to our clients. So one of the key things that this particular company is doing, they've divided up the teams into what they call effective remote units. So they have groups that were responsible, and this is the IT group. So there is a team of about 100 IT staff. So you have your infrastructure, your applications, your program office. So they've broken them up into distinct components. And the way that they've done that is that they have them work on what is called a weekly schedule with outputs that is mostly driven. So as opposed to you working on a big project, you can now break that up into chunks and say that, well, here are components that we're going to work on. And at the end of the week, here are things that we want to be able to account for that we've been able to deliver. The third thing that they've also done is around this whole thing about the daily check-in. And what was created by this group, the leadership team decided that, look, they had prior to this, they follow what is referred to as agility model, where, that was the culture that had been installed. They had more of a Scrum agility model that was working for them, but they were only checking in once a day. But they put in place some cadences as to how they can check in on a regular basis. So there is a meeting that starts around 9 o'clock, and that is where the entire unit, or the broken up units, will be able to get together and talk about what they have coming up for that day, what they will be focused on, and what they will be able to execute. Around 12 o'clock, there is another check-in again, and primarily is the leadership team that is just conveying the corporate message that will come, consolidate that, and try to send that out to say, here are things that's happening within the organization. Around 3 o'clock in the afternoon, there is another check-in to talk about progress, and around 6 o'clock, there's a recap of what was done for that day. So within this group, that is the way the leadership team is really effectively using the means to be able to communicate, at the same time stay fully engaged and drive for performance and productivity as well.
That's really a good example, and kind of skipping down to your third point when you were leading in. How do you think a leadership group or leader instills a sense of genuine relational care and empathy within that very excellent kind of structured communication strategy that you just outlined?
Yeah, so once again, David, I think one of the key things that we've seen, and I think as part of the best practice, the downside to having to work remotely, there is a tendency for you to easily lose touch with the people that you usually engage with. So from a leadership perspective now, one of the key things that we try to advise leaders on, that they will have to be a little bit more intentional as to how they're able to get out there and engage directly with their people. So some of them are instituting, it's not a long meeting, but it's just a weekly one-on-one check-in. And if something that used to be a little bit difficult when they were in the office, because you have a lot of work now. So leaders are now beginning to set time aside, or they're encouraging the underlings as well to be able to make sure that they're engaging on a regular basis. And this is not work related. You're basically checking in with your coworker and asking how they're doing. How is your family doing? So taking the extra step and saying that we're not going to talk about work today. We just want to check in with you to see how David is doing today. So how is the family, David? And how is this going on? And the results that has gotten that they have generated from that has been pretty significant. They've built an effective culture. Employees feel like they're fully engaged. They feel like my leadership team cares about me. So when they did a study, for the most part, it was just a quick survey, they realized that COVID, one of the benefits of it is the fact that they feel a little bit more engaged. They feel a little bit more inclusive because these leaders are taking the extra step to engage with them on a more regular basis.
That's really great insight there, Alvin. And just as a pause to break out here for a second, for the audience at home, as you're watching this, if you have questions you would like to ask Alvin, once again, feel free to put them in on the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen, and I will act as your surrogate in actually asking Alvin your questions. And go ahead and do that as they occur to you. In terms of security, can you talk about what firms and companies and organizations need to do to think through the security issues that have newly arisen because of this COVID distancing?
All right. So one of the things, David, I mean, from an IT perspective, or from a technology perspective, the IT team has always been concerned about one of the reasons why they've tried as much as possible to limit people from working from home is just the vulnerability that exists today. So from a security perspective, there are a lot of groups now that are beginning to rethink the way that they're now giving people permission to be able to work from home. I know companies are now maybe setting home routers and devices where it's more secure and you can easily tap into. We have a client that works in Canada, is a Canadian financial services company. That was one of the things that they had to do when they were transitioning, because obviously financial data is quite critical. You wanted to make sure that everything was encrypted. So they were able to ensure that they had devices or routers that were being sent home for other folks to be able to use, just to be able to ensure that the network was 100% secure. There are other companies now that are relying on third parties to be able to provide services like that around the security of the organization that is moving into that particular space. So there are multiple things that people are doing right now. So from an organization or from a leadership perspective, from what we've seen is that security has become paramount, but at the same time, you want your people to be able to work effectively to be able to drive the true results that you're looking for. So what they're doing is that they're trying to make sure that either they're tapping into third-party solutions or they're relying on their own IT teams. But just to tout the great work that most IT organizations have been able to do, this is something that we refer to from a technology perspective. BDCR, business continuity and disaster recovery, has been one of the big things that IT has worked on for many years. So when COVID-19 hit most organizations, the IT organization was not really new to this. Most of them were well prepared. They had plans and policies in place. All they had to do was just to maybe move it up a notch for them to be able to see the effectiveness of that. So I think from a leadership perspective, I believe most of the IT organizations are quite or not, they are capable of leading this particular place, of leading in this particular area. So I don't think that will be much of a major concern for a lot of organizations in that regard.
Interesting. Question from the audience is coming from Carol Hagan, who asked this question. My organization is becoming hybrid. Some of us are going back to the office and some are staying home. Do you see this new hybrid organization creating further communication challenges? And if so, what are your recommendations for how to manage this hybridity?
Okay, so Kara, if I got your name right, I think great question, right? One of the things that will begin to happen, and as we look towards, the foreseeable future, there might be a blend, that we will begin to see. There will be portions of your organization that will be considered critical staff that needs to be into the office, or maybe there might be more of a rotation that we've seen some other organizations do. People come in once a week, people come in 2 times a week, whatever that will be. So one of the key things that we see, yes, there could be a lot of communication, because in this time, the greatest tool that we have as leaders is for us to stay effectively, for us to be able to effectively communicate at all point in time. So that will be one of the key things that we have to do. We want to make sure that the cadence of communication continues, because I believe most organizations that we engage, most of them had a strong cadence for how they were communicating throughout. So even though you will be going back to the office as a leadership team, you want to make sure that you're still following this particular cadence. So in the case of this company that is based out of Ohio, that we just referenced, for them, I mean, that has become embedded within their culture right now for how they want to be able to communicate. So that's not going to change whether you're in the office or you're out of the office. It will still be a regular thing. It's online. You will have to log into Zoom or Cisco WebEx and make sure that you have all of those things there to be able to drive that communication. The downside to it is that sometimes it feels a little bit overwhelming, that look, there are so many things that we have to do, but the intent, again, is often good. So that's what we want to be able to focus on, is on the intent as part of the best practices. How can we stay actively engaged, and how can we communicate all the time? And also building on that with the other activities that you will be doing outside the office with regards to collaboration. So those are things that shouldn't slow you down. You can only build up from there to be able to drive true collaboration and true communication across the board, with the intent on focusing on how you can drive for higher level of performance and productivity as well.
Alvin, that's a really important point that I have not heard articulated in all the other stuff that, we read in, Harvard Business Review and others. And that is when working at a distance, particularly as a leader, to go the extra mile to also actually articulate what you're intending to do. Because so much of interpersonal communication is nonverbal, right? But we're missing some of that, or it's a little bit off, or a little slightly delayed in terms of our interpersonal interactions. And so actually really communicating well the intention for why we're doing things is also important. So thank you for that point. I hadn't thought of that, and that is a really good nugget there. Mandy Rasmussen asks this question: is there a typical drop in efficiency that we should expect to see and carry while working with a decentralized workforce versus our previous office structure?
Yes. So I think, Wendy, to simply say that, yes, I mean, initially there will be that. And I think that most of us now have already passed that particular piece of performance decline. At the beginning of this, and that was expected. And I think there are some data that I have seen. I think McKinsey published a report quite recently that was back in May, and they talked about the effect of the remote work. At the front end of it, what you saw was that people were beginning to get reacclimatized. And there were so many factors at the time. There were folks that were getting back home for the first time, not being comfortable working from home, learning how to get all the connections together, missing meetings here, missing some deliverables in some instances, because we're used to how we work. We're human beings, right? We're programmed in a certain way. We comply or we stick to routines most of the time. That's what drives us. So getting back to working from home was a little bit more of a challenge at the beginning. But right after a couple of weeks, one of the key things that they saw was that performance and productivity went up. And there are a couple of reasons for that. The first one is that most of us who were working from home work beyond the amount of hours that we're putting into the office. That's another piece again. So they were working extended hours, and I believe most of us can attest to that. It has often been true that when you work from home, there is no start and end time for the most part. I mean, even though you might say I will start at 6 o'clock and wrap it at 4, but most of us are not really wrapping up at 4. There might be an email that will come in, and because you have your computer, you want to get back on that. So there was an uptick again in your performance and productivity. The second piece was now you got a system that you've now put in place. The system began to work effectively for you, and now you were able to drive that again. And the third one was around the fact that you had a better cohesion around with your team, that I'm assuming that most of us had that. In our organization, we saw that the clients that we support also saw that, and they just instituted that, and most of them began to see performance uptake again, move in that direction. So those were the three things that I believe that led to it. But at the beginning of COVID-19, or when we started working from home, there was this decline. And just because we had to break routine, we had to be able to redefine what structure looks like, what efficiency looks like, and how we're going to drive that for true performance and true value.
Yeah, good answer. I actually, in our team meeting in executive education this week, we were talking about this interesting phenomenon that we've experienced where a lot of projects that have been on our list for a long time are actually getting done. And that's not because of an absence of work we have to do. Actually, the opposite, we have more work to do, but the team is actually more efficient and more productive. And I was actually walking the dog a couple of days ago, and I was thinking, you know what I think the leadership challenge might be following this COVID period is how to actually transition back to the original office and how to account for the drop in productivity that goes from the virtual back into the old world. And isn't that fascinating and interesting? Because I think if I really analyze closely what is getting done, we're way more productive when we're distributed. Another question for you, could you talk with us about what advanced tools you might recommend for this period? Like, are there some technologies? Are there some things that aren't commonly known about that you find are really helpful for your clients in terms of this virtual work world?
Yeah. So David, with that, I think most of us already know the ones that are there for collaboration. So, I mean, we have a lot of collaborative tools that are in the market today. Most of us are using things like Zoom, and I think that's what we're on today with DU. So that Zoom that we're working through, it has proven to be extremely collaborative. In our world, for instance, Zoom is what we use to run workshops. One of the key capabilities that we find in Zoom is the break room or breakout sessions that you can easily move into. So given the fact that a large component of our business happens to do with running workshops, consulting, and all of that, we have to be able to break these the individual groups up when we're running workshops. So Zoom has proven to be great. Cisco WebEx is also very powerful, and Microsoft Teams. So those are the ones that we've seen a lot of our clients. Those are your three major ones that we've seen. And there are others that GoToMeeting. There are other things that are in the marketplace. But I mean, if having those tools in place is also critical. But one of the other pieces, again, will be around effectively managing work, right? So that's another piece again, you know, as we're working together, we're doing it in a very collaborative fashion. So we want to ensure that what I'm working on, other people can see how we're working. So Trello has been a very popular tool that people are now using to collaborate. Teams is also pretty good at collaboration. And there are some other ones. Slack is another good one, again, just for projects teams to be able to work on. At the end of the day, you as a leader should be able to take a look and see where your team is basically tracking towards. What are you going to hit the mark? And what are you guys are going to miss it? And why are you going to miss that? So having all of those components, yes, you can collaborate with all of your collaborative tools for communications. But at the same time, you want to be able to have something a little bit more robust where you can actually track your daily performance, weekly performance. Since you're moving to more of a decentralized workforce, one of the key things we talked about earlier was just having these remote business units that can, or remote work units that will work on certain deliverables, and how you capture all of that to drive true performance overall. Those are the key things that we've seen in the marketplace today.
Wow, thank you. Yeah, those are great tips. Alvin, it's really been a privilege to have you on the webinar. You're just loaded with excellent tips. And as we close out here, I think our behind the scenes producer on these webinars, Ashley Sedero, who I want to give a shout out to. The audience here usually sees me or Camila as the host, but really Ashley's behind the scenes making this happen at every webinar. And so I think she's been putting together kind of some key tips. So on the closeout, we're going to put some of your keynotes up on the screen. But before we do that, Alvin, I just want to thank you for being with us. And you just did a great job, and we really appreciate you investing in our audience like this.
Oh, David, thank you so much again. It's always a pleasure that where we can come in and share best practices, ideas, and as to how we can all work together to make sure that we're all scaling up. And I think that's the big focus for all of us. So thanks again for the opportunity. I really appreciate working with you and Ashley and the rest of the team as well. So greatly appreciated. Thank you, sir.
Yeah, thank you. So in terms of Alvin's tips, create agile structures, learn to lead from afar, build a caring culture, build a routine, and focus on security. And fortunately, we were able to talk about each of those, I think, really appropriately and thoroughly in this webinar. So thanks for those tips, Alvin. And for those of you who joined us on this webinar, please mark your calendars for a few weeks from now, July 16th. We're going to have Derek Bennington on the program talking about doing more with less. Also, if you found this topic interesting, please contact us at Executive Education. You can reach us at just our normal email, which is executive.education@du.edu, because we are contemplating rolling out a day-long online course taught by Alvin related to this topic. And if there's enough demand for the course, we'll put it together. But we need to hear from you in order to know whether to move forward on that. Once again, thank you for joining us today. We hope you gained new insight that will accelerate your impact in your community, your organization, and your world. From the University of Denver, Daniels College of Business Executive Education Program, we look forward to seeing you again on the Accelerate webinar series. Thanks for being with us.